Grant gripped the podium, paused for a moment, looking up into the ceiling lights. Then he lowered and shook his head. You cannot begin to imagine in how many ways the world is the opposite of what you have been taught to believe. His voice was very low now, but amplified so everyone could hear it. You see the guy who sells drugs to willing customers so he can feed his family as the scum of the earth, while you see the hypocrite who gives away stolen money in the name of government as a saint. You see the guy who tries to avoid being robbed by the federal thugs as a crook and a tax cheat, but see as virtuous the politician who gives away the same stolen loot to people to whom it does not belong. You see the cop as a good guy when he drags a man away from his friends and family and throws him in prison for 10 years for smoking a leaf. And you see anyone who defends himself from such barbaric fascism as the lowest form of life, a cop killer. In reality, most drug dealers are more virtuous than any government social worker, and prostitutes have far less to be ashamed of than political whores, because they trade only with what is rightfully theirs and only with those who want to trade with them. The upstanding, church-going, law-abiding, tax-paying citizen who votes Democrat or Republican is far more despicable and a bigger threat to humanity than the most promiscuous, lazy, drug-snorting hippie. Why? Because the hippie is willing to let others be free, and the voter is not. The damage done to society by bad habits and loose morality is nothing compared to the damage done to society by the self-righteous violence committed in the name of the state. You imagine yourselves to be charitable and tolerant when you are nothing of the sort. Even the Nazis had table manners and proper etiquette when they weren't killing people. You think you're good people because you say please and thank you? You think sitting in that big building on Sunday makes you noble and righteous? The difference between you and a common thief is that the thief has the honesty to commit the crime himself, while you whine for government to do your stealing for you. The difference between you and the street thug is that the thug is open about the violence he commits, while you let others forcibly control your neighbors on your behalf. You advocate theft, harassment, assault, and even murder, but accept no responsibility for doing so. You old folks want the government to steal from your kids so you can get your monthly check. You parents want all your neighbors to be robbed to pay for your kids' schooling. You all vote for whichever crook promises to steal money from other people to pay for what you want. You demand that those people who engage in behaviors you don't approve of be dragged off and locked up, but feel no guilt for the countless lives your whims have destroyed. You even call the government thugs your representatives, and yet you never take responsibility for the evil they commit. You proudly support the troops as they kill whomever the liars in D.C. tell them to kill, and you feel good about it. You call yourselves Christians or Jews or claim to follow some other religion, but the truth is what you call your religion is empty window dressing. What you truly worship, the God you really bow to, what you really believe in is the state. Thou shalt not steal, thou shalt not murder, unless you can do it by way of government. Then it's just fine, isn't it? If you call it taxation and war, it stops being a sin, right? After all, it was only your God that said you shouldn't steal and murder, but the state said it was okay. It's pretty obvious which one outranks the other in your minds. Despite all the churches, synagogues, and mosques we see around us, this nation has one God and only one God, and that God is called government. Jesus taught nonviolence and told you to love your neighbor, but the state encourages you to vote for people who will use the violence of government to butt into every aspect of everyone else's life. Which do you believe? To those about to stone a woman who had committed adultery, Jesus said, "Let him who is without sin cast the first stone." But the state says it's perfectly fine to lock someone up if they do something you find distasteful, such as prostitution. Which do you believe? The Christian God says, "Thou shalt not covet," but coveting is the lifeblood of the beast that is the state. You are taught to resent, despise, and hate anyone who has anything you don't have. You clamor for the state to tear other people down, steal their property, and give it to you. And you call that fairness. The Bible calls it coveting and stealing. You are not Christians. You are not Jews. You are not Muslims. And you certainly aren't atheists. You all have the same God, and its name is government. You're all members of the most evil, insane, destructive cult in history. If there ever was a devil, the state is it, and you worship it with all your heart and soul. You pray to it to solve every problem, to satisfy all your needs, to smite your enemies, and to shower its blessings upon you. You worship what Nietzsche called the coldest of all cold monsters, and you hate those of us who don't. To you, the greatest sin is disobeying your God, breaking the law, you call it, as if anyone could possibly have any moral obligation to obey the arbitrary commands and demands of the corrupt, lying, delusional megalomaniacs who infest this despicable town. Betsy scanned the faces of the congressmen. Most had their eyes downcast, some seemed to be mumbling to themselves, and a few looked almost comatose with shock. Even your ministers, priests, and rabbis, more often than not, are traitors to their own religions, teaching that the commands of human authority should supersede adherence to the laws of the gods they say they believe in. Several years ago, I heard one pompous evangelical jackass in particular pontificating on the radio that anyone who disobeys the civil authority, be it a king or any other government, is engaging in rebellion against God. Those were the exact words he used. What if the government is doing something wrong? Well, this salesman for Satan opined, that is the business of those in government, and you are still obligated to obey. Everywhere you turn, be it the state or the church, the media or the schools, you are taught one thing above all else, the virtue of subjugating yourselves to mortals who claim to have the right to rule you. It is sickening the reverence with which you speak of the liars and thieves whose feet are so firmly planted on your necks. You call the congressmen and the judges honorable, and you swoon at the magnificence of the grandiose halls they inhabit, like this one, Grant said, raising his arms and looking around the room. The temples they built to celebrate the domination of mankind. You feel pride at being able to say you once shook a senator's hand or saw the president in person. Ah, yes, the grand deity himself, His Royal Highness, the President of the United States of America. You speak the title as if you're referring to God Almighty. The vocabulary has changed a bit, but your mindset is no different from that of the groveling peasants of old who bowed low, faces in the dirt, with a feeling of unworthiness and humility when in the presence of whatever narcissist had declared himself to be their rightful lord and master. The truth of the matter, back then and today, is that these parasites who call themselves leaders are not superior beings. They are not great men and women. They are not honorable. They're not even average. The people who earn an honest living, from sophisticated millionaire entrepreneurs to illiterate day laborers doing the most menial tasks you can imagine, those people deserve your respect. Those people you should treat with courtesy and civility. But the frauds who claim the right to rule you and demand your subservience and obedience, they deserve only your scorn and contempt. Those who seek so-called high office are the lowest of the low. They may dress better, have larger vocabularies, and do a better job of planning out and executing their schemes, but they are no better than pickpockets, muggers, and carjackers. In fact, they are worse, because they don't want to rob you of just your possessions. They want to rob you of your very humanity, deprive you of your free will, by slowly leeching away your ability to think, to judge, to act, reducing you to slaves in both body and mind. And still you persist in calling them leaders. Leaders? Where is it that you think you're going exactly that would require you to have a leader? If you just live your own life and mind your own damn business, exercising your own talents, pursuing your own dreams, striving to be what you believe you should be, what possible use would you have for a leader? Do you ever actually think about the words that you hear, the words that you repeat? You parrot oxymoronic terms such as the leader of the free world. Even pretending for a moment that there is some huge journey or some giant battle that everyone in the entire nation is undertaking together that would require a leader, why would you ever think, even for a moment, that the crooks that infest this town are the sort of people you should listen to or emulate or follow anywhere? Somewhere inside your mostly dormant brains, you know full well that politicians are all corrupt liars and thieves, opportunistic con men, exploiters, and fearmongers. You know all this, and yet you still speak as if you are the ones who are the stupid, vicious animals, while the politicians are the great, wise role models, teachers, and leaders without whom civilization could not exist. Grant gestured toward the congressman. You think these crooks are the ones who make civilization possible? What belief could be more absurd? Yet when they do their pseudo-religious rituals, deciding how to control you this week, you still call it law and continue to treat their arbitrary demands as if they were moral decrees from the gods that no decent person would ever consider disobeying. You have become so thoroughly indoctrinated into the cult of state worship that you are truly shocked when the occasional sane person states the bleeding obvious. The mere fact that the political crooks wrote something down and declared their threats to be law does not mean that any human being anywhere has the slightest moral obligation to obey. Every moment of every day, in every location and every situation, you have a moral obligation to do what you deem to be right, not what some delusional bloated windbag says is legal. And that requires you to first determine right and wrong for yourself, a responsibility you spend much time and effort trying to dodge. You proclaim how proud you are to be law-abiding citizens and express your utter contempt for anyone who considers himself above your so-called laws, laws that are nothing more than the selfish whims of tyrants and thieves. The word crime once meant an act harmful to another person. Now it means disobedience to any one of the myriad of arbitrary commands coming from a parasitical criminal class. To you, the term crime is nearly synonymous with the word sin, implying that the ones whose commands are being disobeyed must be something akin to gods, when in truth they are more akin to leeches. The very phrase, taking the law into your own hands, perfectly expresses what a sacrilege it is in your eyes for a mere human being to take upon himself the responsibility to judge right from wrong and to act accordingly, instead of doing what you do, unthinkingly obeying whatever capricious commands this cesspool of maggots spews forth. Betsy had to force herself not to laugh out loud. Grant was dead serious, but the absurdity of what she was watching unfold before her very eyes was almost too much for her. You glorify this criminal class as lawmakers and believe that no one is lower than a lawbreaker, someone who would dare disobey the politicians. Likewise, you speak with pious reverence of law enforcers, those who forcibly impose the politicians' every whim upon the rest of us. When the state uses violence, you imagine it to be inherently righteous and just, and if anyone resists, they are, in your eyes, contemptible lowlifes, lawless terrorist criminals. Like the lawless terrorist criminals who helped slaves escape the plantations. Like the lawless terrorist criminals who helped Jews escape the killing machine of the Third Reich. Like the lawless terrorist criminals who were crushed to death under the tanks of the Red Chinese government in Tiananmen Square. Like all the lawless terrorist criminals in history who had the courage to disobey the never-ending stream of tyrants and oppressors who have called their violence authority and law. And that includes the lawless terrorist criminals who founded this country. Grant shook his head again, this time smiling as if in disbelief. Everything you think you know is upside down, backwards, and inside out. But what has to take the cake, the height of your insanity, is the fact that you view as violent terrorists the only people on the planet who oppose the initiation of violence against their fellow men. Anarchists, voluntarists, and libertarians. We use violence only to defend ourselves against someone who initiates violence against us. We use it for nothing else. Meanwhile, your belief system is completely schizophrenic and self-contradictory. On the one hand, you teach the young slaves that violence is never the answer. Yet out of the other side of your mouths, you advocate that everyone and everything, everywhere and at all times be controlled, monitored, taxed, and regulated through the force of government. In short, you are teaching your children that the masters may use violence whenever they please, but the slave should never resist. You indoctrinate your children into a life of unthinking, helpless subservience. You are putting the chains around their little necks and fastening the locks tight. And worst of all, you feel good about it. Out of one side of your mouths, you condemn the evils of fascism and socialism and lament the injustices of the regimes of Hitler, Stalin, and Mao. While out of the other side of your mouths, you preach exactly what they did. The worship of the collective, the subjugation of every individual to that evil insanity that wears the deceptive label, the common good. You babble on and on about diversity and open-mindedness and then beg your masters to regulate and control every aspect of everyone's lives, creating a giant herd of unthinking conformist drones. You wear different clothes and have different hairstyles, and you think that makes you different. Yet all your minds are enslaved to the same club of masters and controllers. You think what they tell you to think and do what they tell you to do while imagining yourselves to be progressive, thinking, and enlightened. From your position of relative comfort and safety, you now condemn the evils of other lands and other times while turning a blind eye to the injustices happening right in front of you. You tell yourself that had you lived in those other places, in those other times, you would have been among those who stood up against oppression and defended the downtrodden. But that is a lie. You would have been right there with the rest of the flock of well-trained sheep, loudly demanding that the slaves be beaten, that the witches be burned, that the nonconformists and rebels be destroyed. How do I know this? Because that is exactly what you are doing today. Today's injustices and oppressions are fashionable and popular, and those who resist them, you tell yourselves, are just malcontents and freaks, people whose rights don't matter, people who deserve to be crushed under the boot of authority. Isn't that right? You bunch of spineless, unthinking hypocrites, look in the mirror. Take a good look at what you imagine to be righteous and kind. You are the devil's plaything. The crowds of thousands wildly applauding the speeches of Adolf Hitler, that was you. The mob demanding that Jesus Christ be nailed to the cross, that was you. The white invaders who celebrated the wholesale slaughter of those godless redskins, that was you. The throngs filling the Colosseum, applauding as the Christians were fed to the lions, that was you. Throughout history, the perpetual suffering and injustice occurring on an incomprehensible scale, it was all because of people just like you. The well-trained, thoroughly indoctrinated conformists, the people who do as they're told, who proudly bow to their masters, who follow the crowd, believing what everyone else believes and thinking whatever authority tells them to think, that is you. And your ignorance is not because the truth is not available to you. There have been radicals preaching it for thousands of years. No, you are ignorant because you shun the truth with all your heart and soul. You close your eyes and run away when a hint of reality lands in front of you. You condemn as extremists and fringe kooks those who try to show you the chains you wear because you don't want to be free. You don't even want to be human. Responsibility and reality scare the hell out of you, so you cling tightly to your own enslavement and lash out at any who seek to free you from it. When someone opens the door to your cage, you cower back in the corner and yell, "Close it, close it." Well, some of us are finished with trying to save you. We've wasted enough effort trying to convince you that you should be free. All you ever do is spout back what your masters have taught you, that being free only leads to chaos and destruction, while being obedient and subservient leads to peace and prosperity. There are none so blind as those who will not see. And you nation of sheep, would rather die than see the truth." Grant took a deep breath. "Well, don't worry, because after today I won't be wasting another breath trying to disentangle you from your deeply ingrained superstitions. After your master has come up with some way to pretend that all of this didn't really happen, and to say that I was never really president, and to put a new master on the throne who will control and rob you like in the good old days, I will be happy to let you cling to whatever self-destructive delusions you wish. You can rebuild your government god, pray to it again to save you from reality, and suffer the consequences until you, your children, and your grandchildren are all dust. But what you cannot do, what we will not allow any longer, is to inflict the consequences of your inhuman insanity upon those of us who believe in free will. Most of us will even do you the favor of removing ourselves from your pathetic little circus of slaves and masters and go where you can comfortably pretend that we don't exist. But do not follow us. Do not send the unthinking thugs of your masters after us. Do not seek to punish us for refusing to bow down to your false gods. Unlike the games your masters play, sending pawn to kill pawn, we will not waste our efforts on continually fighting the unthinking robots you call law enforcers. We will go to the top immediately and lop the head off of your great God, and we will do it as many times as we must. Leave us alone and you can keep your gods. Likewise, we do not want and will not accept the stolen goods with which your false gods so easily buy your loyalty and obedience. We will go out of our way to make sure that we do not benefit at all from the looter's game that you now believe to be the foundation of civilization. We won't be using the indoctrination camps you call schools. We won't be using your phony currency or your fraudulent banking system. We won't be participating in any of the trappings and schemes your masters euphemistically call programs and benefits. We don't want your department of this and bureau of that, your inspectors and regulators, politicians and judges, tax collectors and police, or any of the other crooks and thugs which your gods may spawn. We want nothing from you but to be left alone, and we offer you nothing except the promise that we will leave you alone if you do the same for us. That is what it means to be a human being. And if any of you ever figure that out and are ready and willing to give up your chains and embrace true freedom, we will welcome you with open arms. Until then, stay the hell away from us." Grant took another sip of water and put the glass down on the lectern. For a long time he was still, not saying anything, looking as if he was deep in thought. "I just have one more thing to do today," he finally said quietly, "and then I'll be finished." He turned to his right, away from Betsy, and made a gesture to someone she couldn't see. 3 men then came up on stage, the one in the middle looking weak and a bit sick, the other 2 holding his arms. They didn't seem to be holding him so he couldn't escape, as much as they were holding him so he wouldn't fall down. At this, a new murmur arose among the remaining congressmen. Betsy recognized the acting chief of staff, the man who had taken over the position just 6 weeks before, after the former chief of staff had a heart attack. "As you should all know," Grant said, turning back to the audience, "this is Clarence Ferris, the former president's acting chief of staff." He turned to the sick-looking man. "I believe you have something to tell the nation." The man weakly nodded to the others holding his arms, and they let go. He walked unsteadily to the podium, his expression fluctuating between terror and anger. He swallowed hard, looking down at his notes, which he set on the podium. His hands were shaking, and he accidentally knocked over the glass of water, which rolled off the podium and shattered on the floor. No one moved. A tear rolled down the man's cheek. After an awkward pause, he threw Grant a pitiful look, as if he were pleading to be dismissed. Grant's face showed no emotion. "Do it," he commanded. The man began, but he could barely speak. It was all he could do to go through the mechanical motions of reading his prepared speech. "I have served my country as best I could. I cannot tell you how much it pains me to do this." He took a deep breath and looked at Grant again. "When I took the position of acting chief of staff, I made recordings of all my meetings with the president." Now his eyes seemed riveted to his notes. I made the following recording of the president, the former president, I mean. This was one of our regular meetings concerning domestic affairs. We were discussing the situation in Graveston. He said some things that I just tell them what the tape is and then play it, Grant instructed firmly, as if trying to bolster the man's courage. There was another long pause. The man drew another deep breath. This is a tape I made without the president's knowledge of one of the many meetings I had with him. Present were myself, the president, and the Secretary of Defense. This meeting occurred January 9th, 11 days ago. His hands trembling and tears streaming from his eyes, he fumbled with a small electronic device until a hiss could be heard over the loudspeakers on the wall behind him. Our intelligence sources aren't giving us much to work with. The voice on the tape matched the voice of the man at the podium. We don't need any more damn intelligence, came the familiar voice of the former president. We need action, don't you get it? The agent in charge says that if we can show restraint a little longer, he thinks a peaceful resolution might... I'm tired of hearing about caution and restraint. I tried that, and Collins made me look like a damn pussy. So now we're doing something different. After this Flight 422 incident, the public will cheer if we go in and take them all out. But how sure are we that members of the group were even to blame? I know what we've been saying to the media, but the intel is still... God, when are you going to grow up? Yelled the former president. You have no idea what's going on, do you? Sir? Quit being such a Boy Scout. You know what a leader is? It's someone who can do whatever it takes to keep the team strong. You have no idea the pressures, the sacrifices I have to make. History doesn't remember those who show restraint and use caution. It remembers the bold victors. What this country needs most right now is unity, and the best thing for that is a common enemy. I gave them that. I gave them something to rally against. I don't follow you, sir. What do you think every war is? Conflict is what keeps a people unified, keeps a country together. The sacrifices of war, you need them. You need them to keep a country strong. A people without an enemy is a people without a cause. The damn sheep out there needed something to think about besides their pocketbooks. Whatever the cost, they needed a common enemy to make them pull together and feel like Americans again. Did you think I was going to sit around until Collins gave them that? What do you mean? Are you saying you wanted something like this to happen? Wake up, you jackass, the former president screamed. Wanted it to happen. I made damn sure it would happen. I made damn sure that those ungrateful little malcontents down in Graveston wouldn't win any more supporters or sympathizers, and it's working like a charm. Betsy saw looks of shock on many faces in the crowd. Sir, what are you saying? Ferris's voice demanded. Are you saying you knew in advance about the plans to hijack the plane and let it happen? No, you dumbass. You still don't get it. Get this through your thick skull. I gave the order to shoot the fucking plane down. With a loud click, the tape stopped and the room fell silent. A single sniffle was heard from the man at the podium, who now wept openly, his head hung low. Grant put a hand on the man's back, and without raising his head, the man turned and walked slowly off the stage and out of sight, the two other men helping to steady him. You put him into power, Grant said to the audience, his voice low and calm. In your quest for a savior, this is the kind of person you put into power over and over again. These are the people you ask to rule you, to protect you. This one murdered 178 people because he thought it might help his image. What makes him different is not that he would do such a thing or that he did such a thing, but only that he got caught. Most of the other so-called leaders have done similar things. And you put them here. You made them gods, foolishly hoping that the power you gave them will be used for good. Well, let this reality sink in today. Don't hide behind your delusions. Open your eyes. This is the protector and savior you wanted so badly. This is the monster you worshipped. Take a good long look and decide if you want more of the same or if you're ready to be free. All your lives you've been trained to be subservient and obedient. through years of authoritarian indoctrination mislabeled as education, one message has been constantly pounded into your heads by parents, the media, so-called teachers, the entire culture. And that message is this: you cannot find the truth yourself. You cannot be trusted to judge right from wrong. You cannot be trusted to make your own decisions. So if anything comes up that might require you to think, or worse yet, might require you to do something, to take action, don't worry, just huddle timidly in a corner and let the authorities handle it. And now, having been raised to be perpetually infantile, you are existentially terrified of the idea of having to take care of yourselves, having to protect yourselves, having to effect justice yourselves, having to face an unpredictable world without some all-knowing, all-powerful being holding your hand. And so you appoint an imagined authority to save you from reality. But it doesn't, and it never will. It will betray you and enslave you, keeping you forever powerless and defenseless. It's not a fluke. It's the nature of the beast you worship. It's time for you to open your eyes and grow up. Betsy was still in shock from what she had just heard. How long had Grant known about this? And what kind of willpower must it have taken for him to plan all of this, knowing what he knew? In the last couple of days, the media has been theorizing about why the former president would not be attending this inaugural address. It's not because he doesn't like me, or because he's upset, or because he's sick. And he is not vacationing at his winter home, as the media believes. He is dead. Gasps were heard throughout the room. Grant held high a piece of paper. For those of you who believe in such things, here is a copy of the presidential pardon for the man who killed him. It seems that a few people were not willing to let our so-called justice system decide what to do with one of its former gods. I have been informed that tomorrow the media will be told where to find the body of the man who ordered the murder of 178 innocent Americans. A murmur again arose throughout the room, but Grant ignored it. He reached down and picked up his jacket from the floor where he had dropped it and draped it over his shoulder. As for me, I'm heading down to Graveston to shake the hands of some of the few men and women, if any are still alive, who have dared to stand up for truth and freedom in a country that now, for the most part, despises those things.
And that was another excerpt from the novel The Iron Web by Larken Rose, as read by the author. And this is Gnostic Media Research and Publishing's podcast episode number 137. I'm your host, Jan Irvin. This episode is an interview with Larken Rose, Part 3, titled Government, the Fallacy of Ad Verecundiam, Part 2, and is being released on Sunday, February 12, 2012. My interview with Larken, this second part of this series, was recorded on Friday, February 10, 2012. Larken has been here twice before, last June and again last week, and he's back here again with us to delve deeper into this most important and yet most misunderstood topic, freedom. What does it mean to have a leader or government? Does government protect our freedoms? Or is the government the very cause of our enslavement? And what does it mean to vote? Does voting give us freedoms that we otherwise might not have? What if the idea of government was nothing but a religious myth, created by criminals and followed by billions of mindless zombie zealots the world over, just as any other dogma? What would happen if one day, just all of a sudden, everyone stopped believing in government? Today we'll be discussing what it means to believe in government. Is government real or a figment of your collective religious imagination? Does not voting mean that we'd be sitting around like a bunch of lazy couch potatoes doing nothing? Or, if we use critical thinking, is it really our first course of action to disempower the criminals whom we call politicians? Is voting the only way to effect change, or is it in reality one of the least effective ways to effect change and gain freedom? And what does it mean to live in a democratic or mob-ruled society anyway? Today we continue to question some of our most firmly held governmental religious myths as we continue this investigation on the myth of government, exposing government as the fallacy of Ad Verecundiam. It's time to grow up. The time is now to stop having mommy and daddy government tell us what we want, what we can or can't do, say, eat, or what drugs we can take. Today we'll begin by acting as adults, making our own decisions, rejecting the fallacy of appeal to authority, or ad verecundiam. Larken Rose is a self-described enemy of the state and tax heretic, the author of several books, 2 of which were written during his 1-year stay as a political prisoner in the U.S. prison system. Mr. Rose is an outspoken advocate of self-ownership and a voluntary society. For more information, see larkenrose.com. That's www.larkenrose.com. And the views expressed by the authors and guests of this unprogram are their own and are not necessarily those held by myself, the host, or Gnostic Media. You can check out the website at www.gnosticmedia.com. That's GNOSTIC media.com, and you can contact me directly through the web form on the website or at contact@gnosticmedia.com. Thanks for listening, and thank you for your support. And here is part 2 of this series with Larken Rose. Enjoy.
You know, Ron Paul, even though he's playing the game, and in one sense, I think it's a total, what he's actually doing politically is a total waste and distraction from what actually matters.
Oh, I think
like he's
a total red herring.
But I think the fact that he has this much support is kind of a good indication that people are at least starting to think outside the box. They're sort of at the edge of the box. They're still in it.
But the thing is if you watch Clint Richardson's The Corporation Nation 3, you'll see in there that his audit the Fed bill and everything is a big fraud. So to me, I see Ron Paul as strictly a dialectic to Obama, as Obama was to Bush Jr., as Bush Jr. was to Clinton, to Bush Sr., and on and on. You know, they're just using the Hegelian dialectic to march us along to their goal, and Ron Paul is the next one. I mean, if you read his Audit the Fed bill, it asks permission from the Fed to do any more auditing, number one. Number two, the Fed is audited every year, and any fucking moron with a mouse and a keyboard can go online and download it right from the Fed's website. So how, 20 million Ron Paul followers failed to check up on his bill is just startling.
Right, but the fact...
But hold on, but the real issue is all his Audit the Fed bill does is put up a web link on the Fed's website to download the already fucking existing
right
audit. When you get in and you study the stuff, I mean, he's either like a willful ignorant or just, and completely incompetent, or he's a shill.
Yeah, I still believe he's honest. He's a statist, obviously, and it's sort of the watered down. It's sort of that
why
weird.
Why would he leave a clause in his own bill that and everybody tries to dismiss it as, oh, he left that in there by mistake? And I'm like, really? Why would he write that in there by mistake in the first place? Because he writes in there that the whole premise of his bill does nothing, that they have to. That the federal board has to sign an agreement of any audit that's to be done.
Right, which is sort of ridiculous. Yeah, and I don't even know who wrote it, assuming he wrote it himself. I don't know the mentality.
And if he didn't read it and change that, then he's still incompetent.
Yeah. And I mean, the whole, like I was saying, the whole political movement at all, the whole legislative anything, besides, even if you had a real audit the Fed, who cares? Okay, now we know that they're defrauding us. We already knew that. What good would that do anyway? But I think the fact that so many people, he's the first radical step away from what they've always done. And they don't nearly understand how not radical that step is, but at least they're sort of going somewhere. And I think, most of the people that I know who've all the way stepped into understanding self-ownership and all that, including myself, started by sort of walking down the constitutionalist and then the libertarian path and realizing, wow, the whole game's a joke. But I find some, something to be optimistic about in how many people are going that way, and in how many people, like I just did an interview with Kurt, the heck's his name? He does the Daily Paul.
I'm not sure.
Wallenbach, something like that. And I warned him. I said, I'm not actually a Ron Paul supporter. I think the whole political process is hugely counterproductive. And he said, yeah, we have a bunch of listeners who know that, but we want to do it anyway. So I said, okay. I like hosts to know what I think so they don't feel ambushed. But I think inside the people going, yay, Ron Paul, a lot of them are figuring out, not yay, Ron Paul, but, it's like starting to open one eye, and then they're Ron Paul supporters, and then they open it all the way and go, okay, no, that isn't the way. But I think it's at least a sign that they're starting to think, even if they haven't actually figured out reality yet. And so I still take his popularity as a good sign, even though I think what he's actually trying to do isn't going to do a damn thing. It's actually counterproductive.
Yeah, well, and again, if it's counterproductive, then he's incompetent.
Yeah. Yeah, and just, it's so funny to me because I would love to ask him in public, even though if he's an honest guy, it would be sort of mean because it would put him on the spot and he'd feel all uncomfortable. But I'd love him to ask him in public, okay, all this stuff about you want to repeal the IRS and do away with the Fed, are you telling me that you think we need Congress to write down on paper that we have their permission to keep our money? Why don't you just say you have permission to keep your money already instead of trying to? Because I'd love to hear, because he jumps back and forth from talking about philosophy that sounds like self-ownership and playing the political game, which is a gigantic contradiction. I'd love to try to get inside his head and see how much it is refusal to look at things or incompetence or, I still can't buy that he's that it's actually orchestrated and on purpose. Just, you look how much the media hates his guts. But I'd love to
that's
get
again, that's why you should watch Clint Richardson's Corporation Nation 3, because the same stockholders go into the same boardrooms are owning both the so-called media that's against him, like CBS, NBC, ABC, and the control and the so-called opposition or alternative mainstream media like Comedy Central and stuff that does promote him. It's owned by the same fucking people.
Yeah, but I could see that one of two ways. I will go check that thing out, but I could see media people or even political people. They come right out and say, wow, how does Ron Paul get all those supporters? All the politicians want to know how he got so much money. It apparently never occurs to them that people like what he's saying. Now, yeah, it's misguided, it's statist, and there's tons of mistakes. But I could totally see opportunists in the media saying, well, if this is the direction things are going, we'll jump on board and make some money off of it and see if we can manipulate it and hijack it to our ends, which they do with everything they possibly can. Maybe Ron Paul is more of a unwitting puppet, like a puppet without knowing it. I think Obama.
That's that's what I was saying a minute ago. He could very well be just a willful idiot.
Yeah, I can't buy that he's doing like Obama and Clinton and Bush. I mean, they're puppets and they know it. I mean, they were trained to be puppets from the start, as far as I'm concerned. But I think maybe the control freaks are using Ron Paul as a pawn, although a pawn that seems to cause them some trouble.
Right, but okay, so now let's say if you were doing government mind control systems, right, and every year you put out an update of your mind control operating system, right?
Right.
10 years ago we had Bush operating system 2.0, right? And then after Bush, then they brought in, it's like like how Mac has kitten and tiger and leopard and purry fluffy ball and all of this stuff.
Right.
Now, then they brought out the purry fluff ball Obama, and he was the next stage of that. And they're mastering their techniques of, they're tweaking and mastering their techniques of the mind control system. And it seems to me that the character of Ron Paul would fit, Ron Paul version 1.0 update from Obama would fit that perfectly in the dialectic system.
Well, in one sense, yeah, but in another, I think, although you could sort of say this of Reagan too, but just because he would say things like government isn't the solution, it's the problem, and then he turned around and was a fascist on the war on drugs and warmongering and all that fun stuff.
Well, and let's not forget Grenada. I mean, that was one of America's greatest war victories right there,
that nobody's even heard of.
Right, and I mean, it's like, what do they have, like 18 or 50,000 people on the island, and they send in a military of like 10. I mean, it's like Jesus.
More soldiers
and
than people.
Everybody, more soldiers than people, and everybody that went was a decorated soldier for going there. It's like, wow. Like Michael Parenti points out, the whatever university football team kicks ass over St. Mary's Catholic high school team or something like that, and then they're all running around bragging, yeah, we kicked
they
some
get
ass.
A trophy, yeah, right. Yeah, it's pathetic. Oh, but what I was going to say is, Ron Paul, like Reagan, occasionally says things that I think make the puppet masters uncomfortable. Like the fact that he actually said in public, the government doesn't have the right to do anything you don't have the right to do. Which, he doesn't say it very often. But if, for somebody to say that at all ever makes me think, okay, maybe he's an accidental puppet and just doesn't get the big picture and doesn't get that he's playing into their hands.
I'm fully willing to grant him willful idiot, but that still makes him an idiot and incompetent.
Yeah, but I guess I feel compelled to be a little bit patient with him because I recognize my own trip through that part of idiocy on the way to waking up. So
he is a congressman and a doctor. And
anyway,
what would make a doctor go into that? I don't know.
Yeah.
So, Larken, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast for your third visit and a follow-up to our government, the Ad Verecundiam fallacy from last week. We're doing a follow-up part 2 on that, and welcome back.
Thanks for having me back again, and you didn't even get shut down by having me on before, so that's a good sign.
Not yet, but that's why you're back. I'm trying to, push the limit. I'm trying to find where that fine line is. It's like the invisible political border between the U.S. and Mexico. I just can't see it anywhere.
Right. Well, the trouble is when you find the line, nobody ever hears from you again, so it's a slight drawback to looking for it.
Well, you just kind of inch your way towards it, and then you stick your toe over, and hopefully you can pull it back before the rest of it, your whole face gets blown off. So we'll see, though. But, I wanted to ask you, how does the belief in authority cause delight in mistreating others?
That's actually sort of where we left off last time. The effect of the belief on authority in different groups comes out in different ways. And just about everybody can see that, people in positions of authority tend to, power corrupts and they turn into nasty people and they hurt people. People hugely underestimate the significance of what the belief in authority does to the normal people, the victims of tyranny. In a negative way. I don't just mean, the government stomps on people. Just what you said, the belief in authority literally makes most human beings delight in the suffering of their fellow man. And if you ask people, do you delight in the suffering of your fellow man? Nobody says yes. But if you ask people, do you think somebody who gets smoking pot and goes to prison, he deserves it for breaking the law? Certainly, yes, I believe in law enforcement. They're glad that a human being was put in a cage. Or if somebody is a quote-unquote tax cheat, one of my favorite phrases, it's like saying somebody cheated a carjacker. Oh, that poor carjacker, you managed to have him not steal your car. You're so naughty. The fact that people gloat over, that evil businessman was caught, lying about his income, or somebody over there protesting the war or something didn't pay, and law and order was brought to bear and they were put in a cage and serves them right for disobeying the law. It makes normal people delight in the suffering of others. And they can't see it that way because they really and truly cannot separate their own moral judgment from this mythological beast called authority and government. Because to them, literally, if you're a lawbreaker, you're bad. And most people, if you ask somebody, do you think it's bad to break the law? Oh, yeah. Well, does it matter what the law is? Like, okay, it's bad to murder people, but that's not because of the law. Is it bad to, have a fire extinguisher the wrong number of inches off your floor? Because that's a law, too. But people, they're trained to have this instant response of, oh, lawbreaker, criminal, bad. And they don't ever grasp that all that means now, all it means to be a lawbreaker or a criminal is that the politicians told you to do something and you didn't do it. But people still delight in, well, we have to crack down on those criminals, whether it's, okay, they're selling milk. Like they have a cow and they sell the milk.
Oh, my goodness. Are you talking about those evil raw milk people?
Those horrible raw milk people.
They should all be put to death for selling something straight from a cow's teat.
Right. Oh, that's unbelievable. And just because it's illegal, quote unquote. I mean, even that's debatable and arguable.
Right. But even though people have been drinking fresh cow's milk since the dawn of time, and what frickin' moron thought he had the authority to create such a law banning fresh milk in the first place.
Right. And I mean, cops shutting down kids' lemonade stands. I mean, come on. How idiotic does it have to get? And apparently that's helping to wake some people up. But some people still do this lame apologetic thing of, well, they have to enforce the law. And just here you have a guy with a gun coming up to a 6-year-old with a lemonade stand and saying you can't do that anymore and I'm going to make you stop. And people go, oh, well, you have to enforce the law. It shows how literally delusional the belief in authority makes people. Because if anybody else did it, if somebody without a badge was going around town to kids' lemonade stands and saying, yeah, you're not going to do that anymore, I'm going to drag you away and put you in a cage, the guy would get shot because everybody
Absolutely.
would recognize you're insane and you're evil and you're a violent danger to society. But give him a badge and all of a sudden his victims are the bad guy in the eyes of most people.
Until you screw with a 6-year-old. Let me read you what Richard Grove from Tragedy and Hope just sent, if you don't mind.
Sure.
All right. He says, proof for the fallacy of authority. And he says, 1, definition of authority, someone who is allowed to act irrationally. And then 2, the definition of appeal to authority, and he cites the same definition that I read in last week's show, also known as fallacious appeal to authority, misuse of authority, irrelevant authority, questionable authority, inappropriate authority, and ad verecundiam. And description of appeal to authority. An appeal to authority is the fallacy with the following form. 1. Person A is claimed to be an authority on subject S. 2. Person A makes a claim C about subject S. 3. Therefore, claim C is true. The fallacy is committed when a person in question is not a legitimate authority on the subject. More formally, if person A is not qualified to make reliable claims on subject S, then the argument will be fallacious. This sort of reasoning is fallacious when the person in question is not an expert. In such cases, the reasoning is flawed because the fact that the unqualified person makes a claim does not provide any justification for the claim. The claim could be true, but the fact that an unqualified person made the claim does not provide any rational reason to accept the claim as true. When a person falls prey to this fallacy, they are accepting a claim as true without there being adequate evidence to do so. More specifically, the person is accepting the claim because they erroneously believe that the person making the claim is a legitimate expert and hence that the claim is reasonable to accept. Since people have a tendency to believe in authority, and there are, in fact, good reason to accept some claims made by authorities, this fallacy is a fairly common one. Since this sort of quote-unquote reasoning is fallacious, Only when the person is not a legitimate authority in a particular context, it is necessary to provide some accessible standards of assessment. Anyway, and if people want to hear more of that, I read on that last week, but let me just finish up what Rich sent here. And then continuing, so if you are responsible for your actions, then no one else can be responsible for your actions. Therefore, it is irrational to believe that any other human being is impervious to the natural law of cause and effect. And of course, stepping into Mark Passio's territory here, the idea of authority is to believe that natural law, of course, and effect only applies to people who believe in it. It is the quintessential deception handed down over time, which we adopt before we ever think about it rationally or reasonably. In short, no authority can violate natural law, and yet that's exactly what quote-unquote authority claims to be. In fact, it is nothing of substance. And to debate the existence of rational quote-unquote authority is an argument which is intellectually bankrupt on its face, and in fact is much ado about nothing, and yet it's the biggest problem facing humanity, driving it to the brink of extinction. To appeal to authority is a fallacy, but to believe in authority in the first place is a self-deception, and to undeceive ourselves, we must make use of our five senses to observe our reality, attach words and symbols to describe what we feel, and process these potentials through logic to find the actual. Authority is the negation of the individual to use his or her rational faculties. It is the digression of a human being into the mind state of an animal, which enables individuals of this mindset to be subject to operant conditioning techniques. The fallacy of authority, the Amsprach fallacy, that since authority told you to do something, that it magically negates consequences as a result of cause and effect, is the root cause of quote-unquote every problem, as every problem starts like this, quote, the belief in something which does not exist in objective reality. To believe in deception is to do the work of your enemy. You might as well lie down and die, because each lie you believe takes away your liberty and therefore your life. Richard Grove.
That about sums it up. Yeah, and that's why I refer to the belief in government as a religious faith. It doesn't make any sense, or the belief in any authority, but right now government is the main authority people bow to. And people don't get that it isn't, they sort of think of it as some organization, some arrangement that somehow makes society work. They don't get that it really is just not seeing reality as it is and not acting like you're a human being in reality.
Sure.
It's imagining a thing that actually warps reality. While you were reading, it actually brought to mind a little thing in The Most Dangerous Superstition, which goes along with that, which is what it means when a soldier wears a uniform or a cop wears a badge. They take pride in that, and I'm big and important. And this is a short thing. If I can read this, this is the actual message they're sending, and they don't notice this. They don't realize it. They don't think of it this way. But if a guy has a badge and he walks up to you, here is his mentality. I am not acting as a thinking, responsible, independent human being and should not be treated as such. I am not personally responsible for my actions because I am not acting for my own free will or my own judgment of right and wrong. I am instead acting as the tool of something superhuman, something with the right to rule you and control you. As such, I can do things that you can't. I have rights that you don't. You must do as I say, submit to my commands, and treat me as your superior, because I am not a mere human being. I have risen above that. Through my unquestioning obedience and loyalty to my masters, I have become a piece of the superhuman entity called authority. As a result, the rules of human morality do not apply to me, and my actions should not be judged by the usual standards of human behavior. End quote. And you can see it in the way they behave, that they really are shutting off their brains and their morality and their conscience, and they're just turning off their humanity to be a robot for something else. And it's for something else that doesn't even exist. It's for a mythical deity called government, but you can just see it by the way they act and how they expect to be treated, that, hey, I'm not a person. You can't treat me like I'm a person doing this. If I was a person doing this, everybody would know it was bad and you'd punch me or shoot me or something. But I'm not. I have this badge. I'm something special. And you know, when I say, hey, I'm just enforcing the law, that means, hey, I'm not using my own judgment. And they say it with pride. Oh, I'm an important authority. I'm an arm of the law instead of a human being. And you can't be both. If you're not using your own judgment, you're not being a human being. And you're not even seeing reality for what it is. And that's not something to be proud of. That's something to be horribly ashamed of. But they imagine that it makes them better than everyone else, and they don't get that it makes them literally not human. If you intentionally turn off your own ability to perceive and interpret reality and act accordingly, turning that off doesn't make you something better. It makes you a stupid robot. And I wasn't born to be a stupid robot.
It's funny. It's funny that you bring that up, and there's so many people out there who tell everybody to, turn off yourself, let the ego go, just let things be out there. And that's exactly the type of mind control and the type of persuasive rhetoric that allows this type of thing to happen. Somebody else will take care of it. Somebody else will fix it. I just need to be here and sit on my fluffy pillow and meditate and think positively. And, all of you people out there who are negative, and Larken, you're too critical, you're too negative about all of this stuff. I'm sure you've heard that a million times as I have.
Right.
And it's like these people just want to sit, go back to sleep, and they don't want to realize that they've got a chain around their neck and they're locked in a cage, and you're rattling the cage door going, come on, you idiot, let's go. We got the cage door open. Come on, it's over here. And they're like, no!
Right, they get mad at us. What did you open my door for? Close that thing.
It's cold out there. I've never been out there before. I'm scared. It's like a cat, an indoor cat that sneaks outside for the first time. First he sticks his head out, and he's like venturing out there, and he's, oh, look, there's grass and there's bugs and all these things that I've never seen before. It's this timid process of the indoor house cat that people are kind of going through right now, and they just need to wake up and get outside the box.
Yeah. And we have 3 indoor cats, and except for the fact that cats are anarchists because they don't care what we think and they don't answer to us.
Isn't that funny? Hey, everybody, act like a cat.
Be a
you
cat.
Got it? Yeah, cat, not dog. Okay, I'll do it. Whatever
I'll do whatever you say. I want your approval.
That's it right there. Okay, so a dog is the belief in authority. A cat is the belief in autonomy.
Right. Yep, exactly. But yeah, and it really is that way, that it's so scary to them that, that's why I think I said last week, most of what I do can be summed up as I tell people you should be free, and they tell me, no, I shouldn't. And neither should you. Nobody should be free. Right, it's horrible. Right. It's dangerous. It's the end of the world if we're free. If I don't get robbed and controlled by the politicians, there'll be chaos and mayhem, and we'll be killing and eating each other. And
and it's funny because they don't even see that it's the elites and the politicians causing all the damn chaos and disruption and everything,
Right.
Causing the wars that screw up entire countries and break families apart and bomb cities and stuff. I mean, that's all politicians doing that stuff. All belief in authority. You can't pay your taxes and they come and take your house or whatever. That's all belief in authority.
Right.
Everybody, remember, kitty cat.
Be a kitty cat. And you can see the weird mental disconnect. I mean, they were trained to not be humans, basically. Like the Prussian system, we're going to train out of you your free will and your individual judgment and make you be a robot. And there are some, for years, I had fun going into political chat rooms and just ask a few questions, and I could make almost anybody's head explode. Because I'd say, okay, never mind the rest of the world for a minute. Do you really think the world is better if a politician takes your money and spends it for you as compared to you spending your own money? Or if a politician tells you what choices to make and what you should and shouldn't do, as opposed to you running your own life? Do you think that's an improvement for somebody to forcibly control you? And nobody wants to say, yeah. Sometimes they say, well, I'm not the problem. Everybody else is. Well, it's sort of funny that everybody says that. Nobody says, yeah, I'm the one the politicians have to control. But in a way, they all believe that because they really are scared. I mean, it's like opening the door for a cat. Hey, you could stay in the house. It's just you could go outside and decide whether you want to be outside. But it really is the thought that terrifies them. And what a sad statement to tell somebody, you don't have a moral obligation to bow to anybody else, to give them your money or do what they say. In fact, you have an obligation to figure things out for yourself and figure out what's right and wrong and act accordingly, no matter what anybody else says. And the fact that people are literally existentially terrified of that idea is, it shows how successful the authoritarian indoctrination is, because it is uncomfortable. If you've been trained your whole life, like we talked about last week, in school, they train you to think that the measure of your goodness is how well you obey, how well you do what you're told. Well, you go out in the world and you go, okay, now who's telling me what to do? Because I hope you're not expecting me to know for myself what I should do, because I've never lived in such a world.
Right.
I've never known such a reality.
Now they're ready for the sergeant or the boss or the president or the governor or mayor or whomever to tell them what to do.
Right.
How to do it.
And you see it blatantly when people say, well, we need a leader. Why? Where are we going? What they mean
because I'm not confident to lead myself.
Right,
like, what would I do?
Right. That's what they mean, is because I have no idea what to do unless somebody else is bossing me around. And that's the just pathetically sad truth of most people, is they don't know where to begin imagining that they're in charge of their own life and that they're not beholden to anybody except their own perception and understanding and judgment.
And this is why the trivium is so important at this stage, because it teaches people how to think, not what to think, how to look at information and come to clear-cut decisions so that they're making valid choices and moving towards things that are beneficial and rational, rather than orders and irrational from some make-believe authority.
Right. And even getting that there is such a thing as them figuring out what's rational. Like, that's foreign to most people. Like, they have to, it's sort of funny that they need to be taught these things, because they should just be basic how to be a human 101, but they've been taught the exact opposite. So they, well, what if my neighbor decides that blah, 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 what if this and what if that and what if the other thing? Just when you suggest, maybe you should think for yourself and you should decide what to do and not bow to any authority anywhere. And just that terrifies them. And they're immediately, but what if this and but what if that? And it's just, it's so sad.
Appeal to fear.
Right. And it's so sad that they literally are terrified of the idea, even just of themselves being all the way free. Like, and I do this as a mental exercise, and I think it's a good one because most people have hardly ever thought of it. Just say, imagine if tomorrow all the different levels of government in the world, the gang that we imagine as government, they all said, hey, just you over there, yeah, you're exempt from now on. With no laws, no taxes, no anything will be imposed on you by any government at any level. We know you can do whatever you want, and we won't do a thing to stop you. And I ask people, imagine this, if you're the only one, everybody else, we'd have to go about, same rules apply. But just you're allowed to do whatever you want. Do you think you would become a monster? And I think a lot of people are scared that they would, because the authoritarian indoctrination actually subtly teaches you're a stupid, violent, psychotic monster, but don't worry, we'll make you into a civilized human being. So that people really are scared of themselves. Like they've been trained to believe that as long as they have politicians and quote-unquote leaders telling them what to do and telling them what to be and taking their money, then they can be a productive member of society. But if suddenly they were in charge of themselves, who knows what would happen. And people...
And that goes back to having a rational, systematic method of thinking and making rational choices and decisions, which is what the trivium is for, which is why they removed it from us to begin with, so that we're caught permanently in that loop, hopefully, to them. But, by empowering the people with the trivium, with the idea that the concept of government is nothing but ad verecundiam, and armed with the tools of someone like Clint Richardson's research on the CAFR information, their entire system is revealed for what it is, and it falls apart, and suddenly everybody's empowered to take action and make proper decisions. And that reminds me, somebody was asking, what would Larken see as a model without government? That's one of the biggest things that I hear against you. And of course,
Right.
You're only trying to bring people's attention to the fact that they got a chain around their neck and they're living in a cage. Your purpose isn't to explain everything that needs to be done and all the solutions that have to take place. But what would Larken see as a model without government?
Right. The two-part short answer I give, there's a longer answer in The Most Dangerous Superstition, is, first of all, I compare the question to, there's a slave in a cage and I go unlock the door and he gets out and he looks at me and says, where am I supposed to work? How am I supposed to get food? What am I supposed to do? I don't know what to do. And I say, I'm not here to run your life. I'm not here to be your king. I just opened the stinking door for you. I'm not applying to be your new master. And the second part is, that's the problem, is people can't imagine a world not governed by a centralized, authoritarian, forcibly imposed quote-unquote plan. They can't imagine a world in which there are 6 billion individual plans. So they really, well, what's the model? What's the plan?
And even that population number is seriously under question. If you see documentary films like Demographic Winter, population is on a huge decline, and they're telling us it's 6 or 7 billion when almost every country on the planet is below. Every couple has to make 2 people to keep the population level the same, and most countries are at like 1.3 to 1.8.
Okay, I confess I know nothing about that. I just echo what I'm told.
That was an appeal to authority there, Larken.
Yeah, well,
you just
however
got called
many,
out.
X number of people.
I forgive you because I know you had the same, control, mind control education that the rest of us did. So you're allowed to slip every once in a while.
Right. I admit I parrot that number with no first-hand basis for believing it whatsoever. But it's a lot of people, whether it's 1 billion or 6 billion or 53. It's a lot of people. And for most people to imagine...
53 people isn't that many.
Yeah, it's probably more than 53.
Oh, okay.
But for most people to imagine a world in which there isn't some centralized plan, which, if there isn't a ruling class, there isn't going to be a centralized plan. And that's usually my follow-up is, look, I have things that I could suggest and predict would probably naturally evolve in a free society to solve all sorts of problems. But I guarantee that whatever I can come up with is going to be pathetically stupid compared to what all the other people put together can come up with. I'm not pretending I know how the whole of humanity should work. I'm saying,
Larken, I'm completely disappointed. I mean, I was expecting you to tell me what the hell needed to be done. I mean, damn it. I mean, you just let me down. I needed some authority, dude.
Right. Well, that's the problem is people, and I love how people say, well, under your system, what do you mean, why system? All I did was open the cage door and say, want to come out?
Right.
It's not a system. It's a lack of a system. I'm saying there isn't going to be anybody in control of the whole world.
Well, it's like somebody last week was, bashing on Clint Richardson and all of this stuff, just going crazy about how, Clint Richardson is using the, appeal to authority, and he's going to use his power of authority to break up government. And I'm like, no, that's not the point. The whole point of what he's doing in the unparty is the unpresident of the uncountry is to undo all of this stuff. He's not there to with his power of authority, he's going to break down government. Thor throws his lightning bolt,
Right,
The entire point is to bring attention to it so that all these dummies out there that are fighting against it and make comments like that wake up and see what the hell is going on around them.
And it's funny because in their own complaints, you can see the lunacy in their mentality. people say, so you're for overthrowing the government. And I'm for overthrowing the government exactly as much as I'm for overthrowing Santa Claus. He doesn't need to be overthrown. I just want people to realize it's fictional.
You don't have to believe it anymore.
Right.
You can wake up realize one day, hey, you know what? Santa Claus is mommy and daddy. Oh, wait, there's something to that. Mommy and daddy and wanting the government to do everything for me. And how does that relate? I'm not quite sure. Oh, shit, it's the same thing. See, I almost never swear on my show, so I'm just kind of breaking out of the box on this one.
Good. But you can just see it in their complaints that you're trying to I'm not trying to overthrow it. I'm trying to get people to understand it's bogus. It's not there. If the people understood that, you don't need to overthrow it. There's nothing to overthrow. You just ignore the stupid parasites, because when their mind control games don't work, they don't have any power. They're nothing. They're a few little conniving control freak liars, hiding in rooms. And if not for their victims believing their lies, you don't need to do anything to them. But people still, and every once in a while, I get people say, you're trying to force freedom on me. I don't even know what.
Somebody said you're trying to force freedom on them.
It's not just somebody. It's got to be a dozen people by now. You're trying to force freedom on me.
Oh,
how do you even, how can you even know so little about what the words mean to think there could be such a thing?
It's totally Plato's allegory of the cave is what you're talking about. The guy breaks free of the chains. He gets out of the cave. He sees the real world. He adjusts to it. He goes back into the cave and tries to free all the other people chained up, staring at the wall, looking at the shadows on the wall. And then they go and they beat him up for trying to say, hey, you're looking at the frickin' shadows. The outside's over there.
Right.
You can be free. No, I don't want to be free. I just want to stare at the shadows at the wall.
Right.
On the wall. That's got to be reality there. And it's the exact same thing. The belief in government is the shadows on the wall of Plato's allegory of the cave. It's all it is.
Yeah. And the fact that when you tell people if I tell somebody you don't have a moral obligation to obey the law just because a politician scribbled, it doesn't matter. Now, there's some things that you shouldn't do and they happen to write a law about it, but that's not why you shouldn't do them. And just to tell people you don't actually owe a penny to the people in Congress, no matter what they write down on paper. You don't have any obligation to bow to them or to do what they say, ever. And what could be more, not forcing anything on them? What could be more, trying to empower them? But when you see the reaction of a lot of people, it's like, oh, no, that's extremist. Just when you're not even getting to the point of saying, by the way, this is true of everybody else, too. But just talking to a person about himself and saying you're not obligated to obey the politicians, even though they call their commands laws and they pretend to be authority, you have no obligation to do anything they want. Now, it can be hazardous to disobey, but that's a completely different thing. It's hazardous to, step on the ground where there's a rabid Rottweiler, but that doesn't mean it's immoral to do so. And just having people introduced to the idea that they don't have to obey somebody else really bothers a lot of people. It makes them flip out because they, like I said, they can't imagine a world in which they're in charge of themselves because they've never seen it. They've been trained to look to a master and do what they say. And if you say you don't have a master anymore, they have no idea how to process that. They're just sort of, wait, you mean I'm in charge? Wow, this is too much responsibility.
So, Larken, let me ask you a question here. In your opinion, is America free, and why or why not? And, of course, by now this should be blatantly obvious for everybody, but let's ask it anyway.
No, not even close. Well, America's a place. A place can't be free or enslaved.
Okay, I can follow that. That's the fallacy of equivocation there. So, but you're telling me that all these people that go running around and I'm free, but USA, because I can vote. You mean you're telling me that they're not free?
Look how big my cage is. No, they're not free, and they hallucinate a big cage being the same as being free. No, and the problem actually isn't even what's being imposed on them by quote-unquote law enforcers and politicians. The main problem is inside their head, is they don't think they should be free.
Are you calling these people schizophrenic?
Yeah.
They say they're free, and then they're not, and then they can't do something towards their freedom when it's given to them. Isn't that schizophrenia?
Yeah, and they're actually existentially terrified of actually being free. So it's schizophrenia, pathological delusion, and...
The kitten is afraid to go outside if he's never been outside before. It's frightening.
Yeah, and to have a kitten say, "Oh, I'm free, I can do whatever I want," and then open the door and have him go, close that door.
You know what we need to do, Larkin. You know how they have those big towers in big cities for the air raid sirens. Wow. You know what we need to do is put on those towers a big kitty call. Kitty, 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 kitty. Come on.
Here, kitty, come on out.
So
it would be hit by a drone the next day,
or eaten by a dog.
Yeah, because he was told to.
Exactly. So, do you have a copy of your book in front of you?
I do.
Oh, good job. We're
this time I was almost prepared.
Read your definition. Thanks. Read your definition of terrorism on page 76.
76. Okay. It starts with the thing about Nagasaki and Hiroshima. Perhaps one of the most heinous examples of this, we're talking about war and people blowing each other up, was the dropping of nuclear bombs on Nagasaki and Hiroshima, which constituted by far the two worst individual acts of terrorism and mass murder in history. Counting individual acts as opposed to, a whole war isn't really one act. Sure. Together, they resulted in the deaths of around 200,000 civilians. Sorry, I had to refer to authority to get those numbers.
And the guys flying Enola Gay and the other one were like heroes and stuff.
Yeah, hit a button, murder 200,000 people. About 70 times worse than the number of deaths from the 9/11-2001 attacks on the World Trade Center. Notice I don't say who made the attacks. The admitted goal of the nuking was to inflict fear, pain, and death on the population of an entire country in order to coerce the ruling class of that country to bend to the will of another ruling class. Ironically, this fits perfectly the United States government's own definition of terrorism, except that definition conveniently exempts acts that are quote-unquote legal and or committed by governments, quote-unquote. If those in government advocate and carry out violent activities that are intended to, quote, intimidate or coerce a civilian population or to influence the policy of a government by intimidation or coercion, end quote, then it is considered legitimate and just. If anyone else does the exact same thing, it is terrorism. And it cites Section 2331 of Title 18 of the United States Code, which actually gives that definition. And I could just see the government lawyers saying, how the heck do we write a precise definition of terrorism that doesn't describe everything the government does every day?
Well, but doesn't the Oxford English Dictionary list terrorism as a form of government by the use of force and threat?
Yeah, and so, they obviously didn't want to use that definition because then it's them all over the place. But for the purposes of their law, I could just see them thinking, there isn't really a way to word this other than saying all of these nasty things done by subnational organizations, because a national organization, a government doing it, well, that's okay because it's a government doing it. But I wonder how much time they spent trying to come up with some way to describe it and not have it sound like what the IRS and the ATF and the DEA and the CIA and the military and the rest of them do every single day. So they just wrote in, well, if it's law, then it's okay. If it's done by government, it's okay. If anybody else does it, it's evil.
Here's how the Oxford English Dictionary, to appeal to authority, but a somewhat valid opinion in this case. Government by intimidation, and this is the definition of terrorism. 1. Government by intimidation is directed and carried out by the party in power. And then, of course, they caveat it from there. In France during the Revolution of 1789 to 1794.
Somewhere else.
Yeah, we gotta link it to one instance in history. It's not just government by intimidation as directed and carried out by the party in power, period.
Right. Then you could have just said government, quote unquote, and that because the rest of it is redundant. They all do that.
It's what people need to get is that the government are the terrorists. I mean, it's how many times, like John, what's his name, the economic hitman, guys like that going to all these countries and doing all this stuff. I lived in Serbia during the war against Yugoslavia and Milosevic and all that stuff. And, 95% of the stuff that was being said in the media here were completely fabricated. And, there's very good documentaries on the whole war that have since come out on all that stuff. But anyway, it's all done by misinformation, false flags, and terrorism. And this is their way of keeping us in line. And not only that, but keeping governments in line that even dare to empower their own people too much, like Saddam Hussein did, or like Iran does. Of course, they're banging the drum wars right now on Iran, and and people don't even get it. And it just boggles my mind that they could fall for it so quickly after Iraq.
Right.
And
right.
It's like, hello, people out there, you, the listener, are you asleep? Do you hear this message? This is a subliminal message to wake up.
Yeah, and people just, they're so bad at being objective about reality. Like if you say, okay, imagine tomorrow that some country in the Middle East somehow sneaks in a nuke and blows up a city in the United States, and they say, this is what you get for attacking Iraq. Let's say it wasn't Iraq, it was some other country. And they kill 300,000 people.
Oceania.
Right. Right. Oceania attacks us. And they kill 300,000 people. What would you think? And everybody would say that's completely evil. It's the worst evil I could possibly imagine. It's exactly what this government did to Nagasaki and Hiroshima. We're going to murder lots and lots of people, but people can't see it that way. But that was their club. That wasn't our club. Our club is allowed to do that because we're the good guys.
And because the government of Japan, the Emperor of Japan, attacked in a false flag operation Pearl Harbor,
right,
then they're going to kill 200,000 innocent civilians that had zero to do with that. And the Japanese and the kamikaze bombers and stuff, that was just their own system of mind control. And we're over there, we got our system of mind control. You got to go kill them. They're saying they got to go kill us. And it's like, hello, people, do you realize that there's a dialectic going on here and you're both being played?
Right.
But let me put you on the defensive for a minute.
Sure.
In your book, you say that people the world over have had good cause to shoot American soldiers.
Damn straight.
All right, so let's, so I can hear, those Legion bars and places all over the place. So, American Legion and all that stuff, they're hearing this and they're just outraged, and World War II vets think you ought to be taken out and shot for your crimes against those American soldiers who brought us our freedom. So what do you have to say?
Yep, I can hear the steam coming out of their ears right now.
Yeah,
actually, I was just about to bring that up as an example of people being unable to be objective. Imagine this. You're living at home, and somebody says, China says, we think the United States government is getting too tyrannical. It's killing people with drones. It's locking people up indefinitely. Locked up a couple million people that are victimless crimes. So we, the Chinese, are going to come over and we're going to straighten things out. We're going to stop that tyrannical government and free the people of America. And while we're there, we're going to have our troops with machine guns going door to door, kicking in the doors, pointing machine guns at everybody, bossing people around, and looking for any resistance and insurgents. What would you...
defending their own freedom in their own country, on their own land,
right,
against
from an
enemy
invading
invaders.
army. Now, if that happened to any of those vets, they would say, I would shoot them. Good for you. So would the people in Iraq. And they have every right to. The fact that the guy has an American flag on his shoulder doesn't matter. If he kicks in your door and comes into your house, you have the right to blow his damn head off. Which means most of the American soldiers who've been in combat it would have been absolutely justified for their victims to kill them.
Absolutely. I agree. It's natural law. You come into my house, I pull the trigger, motherfucker.
And yeah, you're going way outside the box now.
Woo! All right, let me retract that. I'll go way out of the. I'm going way out there, you bastard. There,
that's better.
Bring it back. All right.
But and the fact that they would all, most Americans would righteously say, "If any Chinese came in here, I'd blah 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 blah," and they don't get that. There's an imaginary line drawn by politicians that says this is their turf, and
it's
outside the line,
hypocrisy.
Right. And morality doesn't change when you step over that line. In Iraq, the U.S. soldiers were the violent invading terrorists. Now, the fact that on occasion they'd shoot nasty people in Iraq, too, the control freaks over there, that doesn't make it okay.
You mean the ones that they put in power?
Yeah, the ones they got tired of. They'd stopped being good puppets, so we got to get them out of power now.
Right.
But, and again... my book, The Most Dangerous Superstition, goes through a bunch of examples that show that if not for the delusion of authority, people can think pretty straight. Like if I said, hey, there's a bad guy in the city, he's going around and mugging people, and he even murdered a couple people, so don't worry, I made a bomb and blew up the whole block that he lives on. Who would say, oh, good for you, cool, you deserve a medal? They say, are you utterly insane? Like, if you could find him and he really did that, okay. You don't just get to blow up a block. Well, how about if you call it war? Then does it become okay? No, it becomes evil and insane. The people who fly around dropping bombs on city blocks are evil and insane.
Oh, wait now. Larken, they use drones now.
Yeah, that's right. They don't even dare to go fly over there. They sit somewhere with a remote control thing and blow stuff up.
Hey, I'm playing a video game. Look. Hey, look, man, we get to kill people.
Right. And if you just do a direct, simple analogy of the exact same thing in a city of, well, I probably killed 10 or 20 or 100 innocent people, but I got the bad guy. People would say, if you think that's okay, literally you're a loony and should be locked up.
Well, no, I mean, it's clear that the bad guy is the one who killed all those people, and he never looked in the mirror and took his own life.
Right. And I actually, there's a thing in the book that I almost hesitated to write it because I know people are going to have a fit. This is serious. Like the military's constantly trying to cover up the extremely high suicide rate among combat veterans. And I decided I'm going to say it in the book because it needs to be said. I don't think the rate is that high because of what they did. I mean, because of what they saw. I think the rate is that high because of what they did and what they realized their obedience had made them into. I wouldn't kill myself because I saw something horrible. I would kill myself if I thought I had turned into something horrible.
Well, it's just like we had the conversation about police officers who resign because they become monsters. They are that monster. They are the monster.
Yeah.
And it's like, they're no better than Hitler's drones going around killing, 63 million people that were killed in World War II. And, of course, the Russians had about 20 million of that under their belts. So it's not all Germany's fault, but...
right.
those Bolsheviks, anyway, that's a whole other story that we don't need to go into.
Yeah, but you're tempting me to quick mention a thing of the whole pack mentality of when people say, the Germans did this and the Russians did this and the Americans do this. Individuals do things. Individuals are responsible for actions because individuals make choices. And that's all. Sometimes it's a lot of individuals at once. But it's always the individual. And when people talk about, well, America went over and fought, America's a place and it's full of people. Some human beings went over and decided to do something. That's the actual reality.
It's funny that you say that because when I lived in Serbia, if people would ask me if I was American, I'd say, no, I'm from California.
How many said, hey, wait a minute?
Well, they got it, actually. Most people really respected it because I'm like, no, I don't want to be associated with these, crazy psychos bombing your country and
right.
And blaming you for defending yourself. I'm from that little place called California that you still like,
Right. Yeah, and I mean, speaking of terrorism, the whole... these horrible Arabs who get so mad at the U.S. and supposedly like, will blow up civilians to make a point because they blame all of America. Well, sounds familiar. Sounds sort of like what the U.S. military does and goes and blows up civilians over there because they think, well, the Iraqis are doing this and the Iranians are doing, there are millions of people and each one is an individual.
It's a hasty generalization fallacy, number one. Number two, it's like, I worked at the LA Times for years, and my boss was Persian from Iran, and it's funny because I worked on two different crews at the LA Times before I worked with this Iranian guy. And everybody on these other two teams, they would always just bash on this guy from Iran. And so one day this guy from Iran comes up to me and he asked me, "Hey, do you want to come and work on my team?" And I'm like, all freaked out. I'm like, everybody here talks shit on you that you're like some crazy Arab terrorist, like you're the harshest person in the whole company to work for and all of this stuff. And you know what? He and I ended up being friends for years, and he was the nicest boss I ever had there.
It's because people just, they do the pack mentality thing. They think in terms of groups instead of individuals. And it's, I still get it from people who are, whine about the Jews instead of, there are individual people doing nasty things and they happen to be Jewish. But if you want to blame the Jews for that, then let's blame white men for everything that any white man has ever done that's bad.
But there is a group of Zionists, and there are subcategories of Zionists, but the foundational idea of Zionism is a threat to everyone's freedom because it's irrational at its face value.
Yeah, and when they say Zionist, I say, good, you just describe people who actually have a specific agenda that's bad. Exactly. When you say Jewish, you mean people who are accidentally born into that, and I happen to know a bunch who are fighting for freedom.
Right, well, and on that note, I'll just interject that I did interview Professor Shlomo Sand from the University of Tel Aviv, Israel, regarding his book, The Invention of the Jewish People, and he proves in that book very well that there is no Jewish race, that it's strictly a religion, that the Zionists themselves made up the idea of the race in the 17th or 18th century.
Okay. Yeah, and I know that, Israel is sort of a made-up country, and I don't nearly know the whole history, but I know there are people who refer to themselves as Jewish who actually understand self-ownership and are fighting for freedom of everybody.
Oh, absolutely.
So I just, when somebody says, "Oh, it's the Jews," I just think, oh man, you gotta be clearer in your thought. Like, it's like saying it's the men. The men are the problem because, most murderers, most tyrants have been men. Yeah, but I'm not one of them, and I don't really want to be blamed for what they did.
My father raped me as a child, so therefore all men are the problem, and I'm going to hate men and be a lesbian instead.
Right, and if if that's the standard, then you hate everybody in the world, because everybody in the world is going to fit in some group that has other individuals in it who did really nasty things. Like, there goes all of humanity. Like, if you can't think on an individual level, you're going to hate everybody. Like, if you hate anybody who looks like somebody who once did something bad, you hate everybody.
Well, and not only that, but even within that, you have to go on a case-by-case, point-by-point basis, because even if, and people love to, attack Alex Jones if we cite anything from Alex, or if Richard, takes a clip of one of Alex's talks and plays it that's perfectly pertinent to a conversation and the information contained therein, but they have such a fear-mongering perspective of Alex Jones that they can't go on a case-by-case basis and just look at the individual evidence on this one piece and say, oh, that's perfectly rational, and it's perfectly explanatory and perfectly clear, and I can accept that. But, oh, Alex Jones is being quoted, we have to, use all kinds of fallacies, and don't you see that you're bringing the level of everything down by citing this person? And it's like, don't you realize that you're using fallacies or lies to justify your attack on this person instead of making sweeping generalizations about things? Focus point by point, because it's the fact of killing the messenger. And I always use this analogy. You have, the town idiot or something like that, and he's on the other side of a hill. Okay, and your village or your town is on one side, and there's another town on the other side of the hill, and you guys are always fighting, and everybody's always making fun of the village idiot or whatever, And then, okay, fine, he's a little whack or whatever. But one day he comes running over from the other side of the hill. Hey, everybody, the other town, their army's coming. They're going to kill us all. All these appeal to fear fallacies and everything. And run, kind of like Alex Jones, right? And so, there's two options here, right? You can think intelligently and clearly, and you can go stick your head up over the hill and look, and you can go, oh, shit, there is an army coming this way. Or you can go, look at the moron, and then you just lost your life, right?
Right.
So, I mean, this is the kind of mentality that people are they come on my forum and they'll argue this stuff all day about, you should never use Ayn Rand. Well, was every word that Ayn Rand ever wrote, was it wrong? Well, no. Was every word that Alex Jones ever spoke wrong? Well, no. Well, think on a case-by-case, point-by-point basis, and don't make sweeping generalizations. I mean, what I'll often do when I'm talking about somebody is like, I'll even say, I've studied a lot of their work, and I find the majority of it to be invalid, but I do find some little nuggets in there here and there that I can take out. And that's the idea of rational thought, is being able to look at all of the evidence, say, okay, this is based on fallacies, but here's a few good nuggets. I'm going to take these nuggets, I'm going to put them in my pocket, I'm going to take those with me, and I'm going to leave all the crap behind. And even though you had to filter through all the crap to get to those nuggets, you're still empowered and enlightened for having done so. And not only that, you understand the crap more clearly and how to defend yourself against it more clearly in the future.
Right. And that it actually goes, in both directions. That inability to be objective, like people will think, there'll be somebody who's put up as a great hero. Thomas Jefferson said a lot of really wise stuff and did a lot of really stupid stuff, like claiming to own other human beings.
Right. Well, his main woman was one of his black slaves.
Right. Somebody he pretended to own. So it's, people sort of want, and I remember, it was years ago, coming to this realization that I should stop trying to categorize people as the smart people and the dumb, or the right and the wrong, because everybody has some of each. And to sort of, as soon as you take somebody and they're my hero, well, when they say something stupid, are you going to analyze it objectively, or are you just going to believe them because they're them? And, it's sort of the flip side of saying, I'm not going to listen to anything you say because a lot of what you say I think is wrong. You have to be able to go through it and figure out for yourself. Yeah, he's right about this. No, he's wrong about that. And it's just, it's way more convenient to just go, oh, I'll just believe whatever this guy says, and I'll disbelieve whatever that guy says. And that's, that's sort of what the whole political game is my guy's right, your guy is wrong. Republicans are great, Democrats are wrong. And like hardly anybody involved can objectively examine any statement that anybody on either side ever says, because they don't think that way. They think in terms of teams, or even in terms of, my guy versus your guy, instead of saying, hey, my guy just said something stupid. I think instead of standing by him and defending him, I'm going to say, yeah, that was stupid. He says a lot of smart stuff, but that time, I don't know what he was smoking, but he said something really idiotic. But people,
I can tell you it wasn't the California stuff.
Right. It wasn't probably imported from some foreign country. But just, the inability.
From Nevada or Arizona or something. Washington, D.C.
Everything's got to be demented coming out of. Look, there I am making a generalization. There's probably somebody in Washington, D.C. who's intelligent and wants freedom.
And is sitting there inside Washington, D.C., sitting in their cubicle, listening to this right now, going, these sons of bitches, they just made a hasty generalization against me. Yeah. I'm here, trying to wake up all these people inside government,
Yeah, but at least I caught myself. It only took a few seconds.
So let me ask you, Larken, would most people commit murder or die before they would disobey some government authorities' orders, and how so?
Yeah, most people would literally kill somebody else or kill themselves before disobeying authority. And the dead giveaway is called war. And if you look at, I only just recently learned some things about the draft. Everybody knows about the draft in Vietnam, may not know the specifics, but looking back in World War II and World War I, I didn't know that in the United States of America, land of the free, home of the brave, 17 people were killed for not going along with the draft, for not being murderers. They were put to death by the government, and 140 some were sentenced to life. I think that was later commuted. But if you just look at the draft, any war, what they did was they sent out pieces of paper and said, yeah, you're going to go to the other side of the world. People are going to try to kill you, and we want you to try to kill them. And look how many people went. That's utterly insane. Now imagine if somebody, Sears sends you a letter and says, yeah, we have some interests over on some other country. We'd like you to go over and try to kill some people, and they're going to try to kill you. Is that okay? People would say, no, I can't. You didn't even mean that. That's so stupid. You can't possibly have even meant that. But when authority says it, people go. They go to the other side of the world and kill other people and get killed, and because authority told them to. That's the most obvious example. But if people think, well, I'm not like that, a few people aren't, but most of the people who think they aren't are. And the dead giveaway of that was Stanley Milgram's experiments, which just plain as day showed that the average American, 2/3 of Americans, this was in the 60s, but I think they repeated the study since then and got basically the same results. 2/3 of the people studied, just normal everyday people, would inflict what they thought were either excruciatingly painful or lethal shocks to a complete stranger rather than disobey an authority figure. Even though they were the people weren't threatened, it wasn't like you have to shock that guy or you're going to jail. It wasn't like if you shock that guy, we'll give you $10,000. It wasn't that guy is an evil, nasty, horrible person and you have to punish him. There was none of that. It was a completely innocent stranger with an authority figure saying, shock him, press the button, and 2/3 of Americans will, even if the guy is screaming in pain. And if I believed in such a thing as required reading, I think Stanley Milgram's obedience to authority should be required reading, but I don't. Just because it shows just how deranged the belief in authority makes normal people. Because normal people don't do that on a normal basis on their own. But if authority tells them to kill somebody else, most people will. And when Milgram does a survey of people who haven't done the study and says, if we did this test on you, how do you think you would do? Almost everybody says, oh, I wouldn't do that. I'd stop. So people imagine that they're in control of themselves, and they hugely underestimate how much evil they would do if a perceived authority told them to. In other words, they're robots and they don't even know it. And, you have a war and suddenly you find out, wow, yeah, you went over and killed some people because politicians told you to. You didn't know the people. You didn't know anything about them. You didn't even really know why you were going. All you knew is authority told you to go commit murder, and you did.
Well, they're terrorists because they're fighting against us for invading their country and trying to steal their land and their property and all their goods and their resources.
Right, they're insurgents. They're shooting at us. That might have something to do with the fact that you drove a tank through their house. Maybe, just a guess, maybe you driving a tank through their house had something to do with the fact that they wanted to shoot.
Or you shot their brother, their mother, their daughter, or something else, and now they want to kill you and everyone else who illegally entered their country. Or illegally, there's that word again.
Yeah, I was about to call you on that.
Yeah, so I caught it. But, so let's talk about the former slave Frederick Douglass.
Yeah, he's, when I was being a political prisoner for a year in 2006, they happened to have his autobiography. I think it was actually just a collection of things that he wrote, put together by somebody else. But he was, he grew up as a slave. And to me, his physical escape from slavery, which he eventually did, was far less impressive to me than his mental escape from slavery. And to read, first-person perspective, having grown up a slave, being taught that you're supposed to be a slave. Your whole family is slaves. All your friends, they're slaves. And being taught that this is what you're supposed to be. And reading in his own words, his...
Wait. So you're saying that a slave could think and write?
Yep.
This person was born from slave parents. So what you're saying is that intelligence isn't genetic.
Well, not entirely. They were no. Although I think what was it? The daughter or somebody of the family illegally, quote unquote, helped teach him to read. But yeah, he was intelligent, and he was so intelligent that when he escaped and went north and wrote a letter to his former master, everybody said he didn't write that. There's no way he wrote that. It was perfectly eloquent, made perfect sense. No, a slave couldn't write that. And then I think, oh no, he wrote that. That's what it was. Sorry, I got that wrong. He wrote letters about his experience in the South after he escaped up to the North. And somebody said he wasn't a slave. There's no way he would write like that and think like that if he was a slave. And at some point, I think his former master wrote a nasty letter about him and about what he wrote. And Frederick Douglass wrote back and said, thank you for acknowledging that, yes, I wrote that and that I'm me. Because the master was all huffy that, that his slave said how bad it was. But at least he accidentally in the process said, yeah, that was him. He wrote that. And yeah, and so his mental escape from slavery and just things that should be so basic, but watching somebody go through the realization and realizing most Americans haven't gone through this yet, of coming to the realization, I don't belong to him. I don't have to serve him. I don't have an obligation. There's nothing just about this. There's nothing rational about this. I own myself. He doesn't own me. And seeing somebody wake up to that, in his own words, is just, it's an amazing thing. It's watching somebody recapture their own humanity. And then he physically escaped later on. And he described how a lot of the slaves thought they were supposed to be slaves and how they would view a runaway slave as a thief for stealing from the master, for stealing himself from his master. And they really and truly believe that. And he describes how if you make somebody a slave, you have to, demolish his ability to reason and make him not be able to tell that there's anything wrong with slavery. Make him think that that's actually how things should be. It's not just, well, I guess we'll make the best of this bad situation. And I, being whitey growing up in America, I always pictured the black slaves thinking this is horrible and evil and unjust, and the first chance we get, we're going to run away. Because it never occurred to me the slavery went much deeper than that. They thought they were supposed to be slaves. And occasionally one would figure out, no, this is wrong and evil and run away, like Frederick Douglass. But I remember the shock of realizing they weren't just physically enslaved, they were mentally enslaved to the point they thought that was legitimate. And that's still where most Americans are. Oh, I got to throw in one more thing about Frederick Douglass. It was so funny. I literally burst out laughing while sitting in prison reading Frederick Douglass's autobiography, where he came to the realization that an income tax is worse than slavery. Literally, because his master at one point said, he worked there, and he begged his master, let me go work somewhere else. And finally his master said, okay, I'm going to let you go work somewhere else, and I get a cut of it, and I decide how much of it I get, and I'll let you go work out there. And for a while, Frederick Douglass thought, this is great, this is so much more freedom, and this is awesome. And then I'm still stunned that Frederick Douglass came to the realization, this is worse, because it gives the illusion that I'm free, but I'm not. He gets to decide how much of what I earn he's going to take. At least when I was a slave, there was no illusion. He owned me. I was his property. But if he lets me earn stuff and decides how much I'm allowed to keep, i.e. an income tax, that's worse. So a slave thought an income tax was worse than direct slavery. For any of you out there who like the IRS and who think you're free in the United States of America.
A touch of irony, folks.
Frederick Douglass thinks you're worse off than him because there's an income tax instead of direct slavery, because it's still slavery. It's just slavery with some decorations on top. And unfortunately, that's enough to trick most people who just like the wealth.
Cupcakes are really pretty, Larken.
Yeah, pretty cupcakes. And most people really will do what the slaves did, which is if you say you don't have to give your money to the Congress, they will think that counts as stealing. Not allowing yourself to be robbed by your masters, most Americans really and truly perceive that as stealing. Tax cheats. How could you not pay your fair share? Because they have the slave mindset. It was trained into them.
Yeah, even Plato was a slave for a while. And of course, he's the one that wrote all this crap for the elites so that they could put this cage around us.
Right. Elitist fascist that he was.
Yeah, well, I think he wrote a lot of that to get some freedom back. I can't remember if he wrote. Gene O'Denny was telling me a lot of this. If he wrote it before or after his slavery, but anyway, to get people to recognize the problem, what are some of the solutions you see to implementing this type of autonomous society?
Well, it's really the I would say the main step, almost the only step, is a mental one to get people to see reality as it is. Because what people do after that, I'm not really concerned about it. I'm not, having seen what human beings are capable of when they're actually free and they're dealing with each other on a mutually voluntary basis, I kind of don't care about that. That's sort of the afterwards. Now, I think it'll be amazingly impressive, far beyond what I can imagine right now, just like what we have right now is far beyond what anybody could imagine 200 years ago. But to me, it's just a matter of people getting their heads outside of the cage that says they're beholden to somebody else. And so many people are so stuck in the mindset of, well, we need a master plan, that they don't get that the main plan we need is don't have a master plan. In other words, have a master plan for each individual. You make your own master plan. And it can go along with somebody else's. For some reason, some people think, no rulers means everybody runs off and hides in a cave by himself and every man for himself. And that's silly. Why would you do that? Just because you're not being robbed, you can't cooperate and organize?
Well, I think that's partly, Ayn Rand's fault. She, while in her John Galt speech that's taken from Aristotle, she does a lot of good there. But at the same time, Atlas Shrugged is entirely based on the appeal to authority. And, so people read stuff like that and, okay, I can get that. But then they think if this rich John Galt type figure, J.P. Morgan, Rockefeller, whatever label you want to put on them,
right.
If they're not carving the way for humanity, for all of us, profane dead types, then where would we all be? But it's the very fact that they're, stealing everything and not productive members of society. They're, as you have already pointed out, they're leeches, they're parasites. But I think that has something to also do with it. It's just another layer of this delusional icing that people have on the top.
Right, and it's sort of, going back to the slave plantation analogy, they don't notice that they do everything. The people, it's well, if we didn't have leaders, first of all, they're not leaders, they're parasite thugs. There's a difference. If somebody is actually smart in a way that makes other people want to emulate them, that's a leader. But don't refer to a thief and a thug as a leader. But setting that aside, if we don't have leaders, how will anything work? And people don't get the politicians, the parasitic ruling class. They don't contribute anything. No know-how, no technology, no resources, no wealth, no understanding, no intelligence, nothing. They just boss you around. The people already do everything. When people, well, how will the roads be built? Well, you see the guy who's building it right now? He would build it. Or somebody else would. The trucks aren't going to disappear. The technology isn't going to disappear. That guy building the road isn't going to disappear. The only thing that disappears is the guy who forced you to pay for him so he could give a no-bid contract to his cousin. They don't get that the only thing the belief in government adds is a giant leech stuck on the side, and that everything productive and organized and useful about society is already done by the people who aren't the rulers. We're already the people who make everything work. It isn't
right, I was just going to say it's like when, and I think I may have mentioned this last week, but it's like when Clint Richardson did the investigation on my local school district. And here the school district is, all the teachers and everything worried about, having enough money coming from the state and everything so that they can pay the teachers and do all of this stuff, and where's the money coming from? And obviously it's coming from the local community here. And then when you go and you look at the comprehensive annual financial reports, you realize that the school district stole $20 million away from the public that they could have used for the very education and the things that they're trying to get accomplished. So again, government is the hindrance to the local community getting the education of all the children done properly. And not only that, but the type of education that they're giving is crap as well.
Right. And the level of disconnect, I see it a lot in like comments on my YouTube videos and stuff of I'm allowed to rob you and the tiny dot and stuff. And people say, well, if we didn't have government, who would pay for the roads and the schools, and how could we afford all those things?
How do you answer that? What do you say for that?
First of all, I shake my head and try not to cry and say, who do you think pays for them now? The politicians don't pay for it. You already pay for it. The only difference will be you won't have to give a giant cut to people who sit around looking important and not doing anything or providing one scrap of value for humanity. But people literally word it that way. Well, how could we afford to do X? Like, where do you think they get the money? You already do X. Not only do you do X, but then you work really hard so that they can have limos and huge buildings and war machines and Ponzi schemes and all sorts of really stupid things. But people really have this sort of, normally it's unstated, but every once in a while it just comes flying right out of their mouth, that they really and truly believe that the wealth we have comes from the government, which is just, it's like a cow with a 100-pound leech stuck to it saying, don't take that leech off. Where would I get blood from if you take the leech off? Just, no, you're providing your blood and the blood to feed it. If you took it off, all it would do would make you way better off. But people just, they've been taught to think that goodness comes from the ruling class when it's just a huge parasite. And most people, if they think about it and you ask them, they sort of know that. Like, they sort of know, well, okay, it gets money by taxing us. But on some superficial level, they don't know it. They really think roads just magically come out of Washington or something. Like, well, people could never afford to build a road, but Washington can because they have like magic pixie dust or something that make roads appear.
Right. Well, yeah, they do. So Stephen Molyneux often says that the dissolution of the state will likely take several generations. Thus, he argues that the solution for now is philosophical parenting, and he encourages his listeners to continue to pay taxes and stay within the law and improve the minds of those closest to them rather than practice civil disobedience. What do you have to say to that?
To me, this is sort of a tactical disagreement rather than a philosophical one. If you can get everybody in the world to understand self-ownership, good. You win, it's over. No revolution, no bloodshed, nothing nasty. That's fine and dandy. The problem is the in-betweens. If Congress says, well, we're going to steal half of what you earn and we're going to go use that money to blow up brown people on the other side of the world and to buy people's dependency here and destroy their lives and make them, helpless, hopeless property of the state, the destruction they're doing now, and you get to be almost broke or robbed blind. There's sort of an in-between at which, if 50% of the people understood it, again, you wouldn't even need a revolution. 50% of the people just go, no. But there's a certain line at which, if 2% of the people, if two people know it and they resist, they just get crushed and made an example of and they die. There's some line at which enough people know that they can say, yeah, we're not playing. We're going to disobey. And if you send guys with guns, well, we have guns too, and bad things are going to happen to somebody. There's a line at which a minority who do that will win. And to me, the question becomes, are we willing to put up with all the injustice between that line and everybody understanding the truth? All the time that has to go by in between.
So what you're looking for, Larken, is the 100th monkey.
Yeah. Yep. And when we get enough people that, it's sort of, I can easily say, look, if I went along and did as I'm told and paid my fair share and kept my head down, I would have an easier life than I did right now. I wouldn't have spent a year in a cage. I wouldn't have been robbed blind, stealing my house and all that fun stuff. But I chose not to, because if everybody does that and just nicely philosophically talks about it, I think it's going to be a really long dang time before anybody sees any freedom. And I would love nothing more than to achieve freedom without anybody getting so much as a stubbed toe. Trouble is, human history says you don't get there that way. And
tyrants like to be tyrants.
Yeah, tyrants like to be tyrants. And here's about the only philosophical point, and I'm not even sure it would be a disagreement between Stefan and I, but this might count as a disagreement. I'll pretend it is, because I like it when every once in a while we at least have something to disagree on, because I agree with so much of what he says. The right to defend yourself against aggressors, whether they have a badge or not. Understanding self-ownership, you can't understand self-ownership if you don't understand that right. In other words, to say, yeah, Mr. Slave, you have a right to own yourself, but don't run away. There's a contradiction there. Even if you're just saying, well, don't run away because it'll be hazardous, it's still sort of saying the good thing for you to do is keep living as a slave. And at some point, out of self-preservation, that's sort of true. Like, if they're going to catch you and kill you, probably being a live slave might be better than being a dead attempted runaway. But the reason I write things like, when should you shoot a cop, is not because I want a revolution, and people who've read the article actually get, oh, okay, it's not quite what the title was supposed to do and freak people out.
It's just supposed to incite them to read it.
Right, incite them to read it. And if people read it, they realize, oh yeah, there is some point at which you really do have to forcibly resist the people in authority. If they get evil enough, you kind of have to shoot them. And I understand people not wanting to talk about that, A, because it freaks people out, and B, because it freaks people with lots of power out, and then they want to kill you. And so far, they haven't killed me, and I'm very thankful that I live somewhere where...
Your cousin and I often debate about who's going to get hit first.
It's a race.
You or me or Rich or who,
Right. It's a race. Anybody placing
Clint.
odds on that?
Yeah. Anybody want to place odds right now? Is it going to be Larken, Clint, me, or Rich, Paul, James, right. Or James? Who's it going to be first,
Right. Well, I often say that they should have killed me 10 years ago before this many people knew who I am. Now I don't think it would really do them any good. It would just sort of annoy a lot of people.
Well, it would make you a martyr, too, and it's like they killed William Cooper, and look what happened. Oops!
Right.
All of a sudden, the guy's like the conspiracy god, and William Cooper did a lot of fantastic work. If you get into a lot of his stuff, he was really out there trying to get down to the facts and the core research and gather data and verify and remove contradictions and spread the news to others. Yep. And they just had to take him out. I guess he shouldn't have pulled a gun back on a cop, but, go ahead.
Yeah, that's sort of hard to say, because there's that point, it's a thing I keep sort of thinking about writing, and I never quite dare to because of what it'll sound like. But the sad truth that all of history screams is the point at which you should have picked up a gun and shot the guy with the badge is usually happens about 10 seconds before you die because you didn't.
Exactly. And it's like you might, they're going to throw your ass in jail for 10 or 20 or 30 years or whatever, but at least you're still alive. And
right.
And this authority never had the right to come in and, unless you violated the person or property of another. As I said last week from Peter McWilliams, my freedom ends where your nose begins. And if you violate that, that's that.
Right. And that's it. But the right to defend yourself. And if you... how many examples in history where there are people saying, this is getting really bad, this is getting really bad, this is getting really bad, maybe it'll get better. Oops, now we're in a cage. Which means yesterday is when we should have shot him. But that, it's this paradox that the good people don't want to shoot other people, even when they deserve it, even when it's justified, even when it's necessary.
It's like Monsanto is still allowed to operate. I can't even fathom how that company could still be operating with all of the people all over the entire globe completely outraged about them.
Right.
And there hasn't been a huge mob yet that's descended on it. What the hell? Wake up,
Right.
people! Shut it down!
Right, because sometimes we try too hard to be quote unquote civilized, and we put up with stuff that I could point to.
This is what kung fu and martial arts is about: the defensive arts of fighting. And it's like, we're being attacked by these companies like Monsanto and even the U.S. government and all of this stuff. This is when we have the right to defend ourselves from being attacked, from the food being poisoned, from them literally destroying the genetic map of plants all over the planet for their own profits. It's time to step up. Pacifism is good to a point, and I'm not telling anybody to go be violent, but people do need to step up and take some sort of action, blocking the company, turning off all of its lights, not allowing them peacefully to operate. Something has to happen, and it has to happen now. And it's not, people are just think that, okay, well, we can wait and somebody else is going to take it and somebody else is going to take care of it. Eventually, we have to take action and just shut this stuff down and tell all these people and these biochemists to go the hell home. They're not going to be able to come back. They need to find another line of work, and that's that.
Yeah, and just people, sometimes they hesitate just because they're cowards, but I think a lot of times people hesitate because they're trying to be nice. They don't want to resolve something by violence, but they don't get that,
But
especially
see, here's the thing. It's self-defense. My freedom ends where your nose begins. When you start poisoning my food, my water, my child, everything else, guess what? All the rules change at that point.
Right. Or actually, the rules of morality stay the same, but the rules say I'm going to defend myself.
Exactly. It's natural law.
And that's the thing about, the reason I wrote When Should You Shoot a Cop and the YouTube video to follow that up and stuff is to make people start thinking about it, because over and over again in history, you see that people saw that things were getting really bad, and they think, we'll protest and we'll complain and we'll vote and we'll do this, and because we really don't want to resort to violence. And that's a good trait among people, that they try everything else first before violence. But if you never get to the point where you try violence, you get to ride in a cattle car, you get to be in a cage, you get to be killed. And just to have people start to think, where will you draw the line? And, the discussion hardly even gets to exactly where the line should be, because so many people just freak out at the idea that they could ever have a line. At what point does that guy with a badge get a bullet in the head from you because there's something you won't put up with? And there's, people can have different lists and put the line in different places, but most people, they don't have a line at all. Literally, government could do absolutely anything to them. Steal their kids, put them in a cage, steal everything they've ever had, and treat them like dirt. And most people will whine and protest and vote, and then be in a cage and not be allowed to whine or protest or vote, and say, oh, darn, maybe we should have done something a while back. There's that great Solzhenitsyn, I probably pronounced that wrong, quote about when he was in the Soviet gulags, talking about how, why didn't we do anything when we had a chance? If we had just done something, if every once in a while we'd laid ambush to the fascists doing this to us, we wouldn't all be thinking and sitting here in the camps thinking, darn it, why didn't we do something? And just that,
right.
The civilized people have the huge disadvantage that, you open a history book and...
But don't the elites think that they're the ones who are civilized? Oh, right, they're not. It's the irony thing again. Right,
it's being civilized by violently dominating the world. But the civilized people almost always wait a little bit too long. And I could picture myself doing that. I just say words. I don't go blow up buildings. I say words. I point out the truth. They rob me blind. They threaten me. They harass me. They put me in a cage for a while. There's some point at which I'll say, no, I'm not going to go along, and one of us is going to die. And it may very well be me, but I bet I'm taking a couple of you with me. But, but that's, I don't want that point to come, which means I'm going to hesitate a lot. Not,
and
first
maybe
of all,
right even past that day.
Yeah, and that's the thing, is how often have people have hesitated past the day when they should have said, all right, this is the line, even though this changes my whole life and, now I'm an evil fugitive and a nasty terrorist and they're going to try to kill me, there has to be some point at which you say, no, I'm not going to let you do that to me. Like, we put up with so much, and history shows that, well, Declaration of Independence even says this, that people are way more likely to put up with injustice that they're used to than to say, no, let's go to the trouble and risk of getting rid of this because it's worth it. And on an individual level, it hardly ever seems worth it. Have a shootout with cops. That sounds like a really bad idea. But if you want to know what's an even worse idea, open a history book and see what happens when people never shoot at cops, never defend themselves against government aggression. It gets a lot worse than if they occasionally have a revolution and say, we're not putting up with this. And it's,
when I was in Serbia, sorry to interrupt, when I was in Serbia, finally, and I don't know if I mentioned this last week, but finally, all of the, every week there were all these protests in Belgrade. The B-92, would help organize all this stuff. And every week, the government would round up all the farmers from the villages and send the farmers in to beat up all the protesters, right? And so the essentially the government controlled all the media that was getting out to the farmers in the villages, but they weren't able to control the media near as well inside the big cities. So one day, at the day that just so happens to be the fall of the government of Serbia, this one day, all the protesters come into Belgrade and fill the streets, probably a couple 100,000 people, and then the government brings in the busloads of farmers, and then the farmers do something really interesting this time. Rather than turning and beating up and firing on the protesters, they turn the other way, and they all woke up almost at once, and they opened fire on the Capitol building and the police, and all of the police and guards stood down, and that was the end.
Yeah. And it's a perfect example of how all of government power is the illusion. They have their peasants fighting against each other. They give some of the peasants badges and say, you're very important now, and you should boss the other peasants around. Or they use the farmers against the protesters, or however they do the divide and conquer. And if the people ever catch on to what's going on and say, let's not divide.
It's just like, and I've often talked about this on my show about how they even do this in prisons. You have the different race groups in prisons to keep them all under control. Because if all of the prisoners in prison realize that if they all work together instead of getting in race groups, they could all get the hell out and have freedom, So the whole idea is to keep them constantly fighting amongst themselves.
Yeah. Now, I will say that I think we are very quickly coming up on the U.S. tyrants have a very rude awakening, because I think, the tyrants, and it's a mistake they often make, they sort of think, well, yesterday there were a few people whining, and the day before that there were a few people whining. Every once in a while there's one that we actually have to kill because they stand up to us. But hey, tomorrow will be pretty much the same. We can keep ratcheting it up. But usually, like you said about the farmers, suddenly something will click, and one person will stand up. 1 year, one person will stand up and everybody will watch them get killed. The next year, one person will stand up and everybody will go, yeah, let's do that. And suddenly the government's just doomed. They have no power. When their own soldiers, I know a lot of people, active and former military, who, they're constitutionalists, which I'm not, but they remember that they swore an oath to uphold the Constitution. And they tell me, not very loudly if they're still active duty, I still meant that. And I know who the enemies to the Constitution are, and they ain't foreign. And they're not the domestic terrorists that the FBI is talking about. And when the crap strikes the air propulsion unit, I'm going to be on the right side. And you can just imagine the rude awakening of the tyrants when they say, okay, go crush all those protesters. And suddenly they're mercenaries. Some of them are pointing their guns the wrong way. No, the other way. Those guys.
Well, right. I remember when Hugo Chavez was overthrown. Of course, you had 1 million people in Caracas who descended on the Capitol building to help overthrow the coup. But then, even their own military people, the people that they had signed to guard the Capitol building, suddenly turned and went after them as well. So the coup got defeated not only by the public, but by their own guards and everything.
Right.
Know?
And it can very quickly come to that because there's, everybody has complaints about what the stupid government is doing with their money, whether it's warmongering or socialist redistribution or, pick your favorite of the list of 1,000 stupid, destructive, inhuman things the government does. And when people suddenly realize, we're not going to let this keep going, the flip can be almost instantaneous. And the fact that there was another quote unquote news story, which was a fearmonger piece by the control freaks disguised as a news story a couple days ago in Reuters, talking about, we have to watch out for the sovereign citizen movement and these domestic terrorists and blah, 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 blah. And they keep looking for like little individuals. They don't get that when the switch comes, it's going to be 100 million people. And the dumbest thing in the world will be for a cop or a soldier to fight against that. And some of them are going to figure that out and say, I'm having tough times making ends meet. Congress is robbing everybody, including the people they just told me to shoot. Maybe I'm pointing in the wrong direction.
And the problem also comes up when, and in Belgrade, this was a part of the situation as well, was when the guards were told to open fire on the protesters. Of course, you have hundreds of thousands of people in the crowd of protesters, and you have sisters and brothers and moms and dads and uncles and aunts of the guards in the crowd. They're not going to open fire on their own family, and that's when some of the guards actually turned around as well and started firing on the Capitol.
Yeah.
But Larken, we're way past an hour and a half. I'm thinking we only got through 2/3 of what we needed to cover. Are you interested in doing a part 3?
Do it again. Woohoo! Yeah.